The Klingon language was created by Mark Okrand for the Star Trek franchise.
USS Enterprise show Wustaj Jich es Klingon Hol Hastadaj Dablej Lit.
Klingon Hol, or Klingon in English, is the language of the Klingon species. They're these guys, humanoid warriors from a planet called Kronos, which humans tend to call Kronos for some reason. By the modern day, Klingon is spoken in 80 polyguttural dialects, with a whole bunch of species having speakers, and a prestige dialect of whatever the dialect of the current sitting emperor happens to be, starting with founder and first emperor of the Klingon Empire, Kaelish, or Kalis, the Unforgettable. The Emperor spoke the precursor to modern Klingon, and we here at Interdimensional News have, of course, resurrected him to speak about his language. Let us see if he is ready to talk. Okay, still on that. Not to mention our magical translate any language without prior knowledge translator software isn't working for some reason. Of course, you may have noticed from Kalis's appearance, the Klingon look visually similar enough to humans that one might mistake them for a human in heavy makeup, and in fact they are capable of producing hybrid offspring of humans. However, there are some substantial biological differences, leading both to the harsh sound of their language when compared to human ones, and the noticeably odd grammar in some areas of it. A simple example of this is in word order. Klingon word order is object, verb, subject. So for example, the English phrase "the woman hit the man" becomes "lod kip bet," which is literally "man hit woman." This word order, effectively English but backwards, is very rare in human languages, occurring in only 0.7 to 0.8% of all human languages. The only lower at 0.2 to 0.3 is object, subject, verb. That's Welsh but backwards. Though it's worth mentioning, Klingon exhibits polypersonal agreement with pronoun dropping. So a phrase like "I hit the man" would become "lod vikip," and "I hit you" would simply be "ka kip." This makes the word order appear more mundane, until you realise that the prefix "ka" is encoding both the subject and object in a single, incredibly regular affix, which is an example of portmanteau agreement, where a single affix encodes both the subject and object of a verb, which is another rare feature of human languages used extensively in Klingon. The vast majority of inflection on nouns and verbs is done in suffixes, fitting into 5 noun slots and 9 verb slots, although verbs additionally have a class of suffixes called rovers, which are primarily used for emphasis or negation, and are effectively suffixed onto suffixes, or the noun root. For example, using the negation rover bet in different places can turn the verb lushoplach, they are able to eat it, into variants lushoplach bet, they are not able to eat it, lushop bet lach, they can refuse to eat it, or more literally, they are able to not eat it, and even lushobet lach bet, they're not able to not eat it, or rather they cannot refuse to eat it. But before we go over the grammatical forms, have we subdued Kalis?
I will talk.
Very good, and I see they've got you speaking English. So, you're familiar with human languages now. What differences do you notice?
Bah! Your plosives are weak and you can scarcely even touch your uvula.
Yes, one notable fact about the Klingon language is all the voiceless stops, p, t, k, are pronounced so hard linguists analyse them as aspirated in all environments.
Ah, linguists would analyse your consonants as scarcely murmurs.
And what about your voiced stops, b and d? They aren't aspirated.
B? D?
That is interesting. Remove Kalis for a moment.
What?
Whilst Klingon's evolution of the language is somewhat unclear, we do know of various additions to the lexicon, like how there was no Klingon word for peacemaker prior to the mid-24th century, which is a little odd as you'd think that would be a trait of either entirely pacifistic or extinct cultures. Regardless though, there isn't a single documented phonological shift, let alone old letters for old sounds. The Klingon script is fully phonemic. Both the Krotmag and Takev dialects, however, change the phonemes b and d, the former to m and n, and the latter to the prenasalized mb and nd. This could suggest some historic, more nasalized versions of these phonemes. Or I might just be talking out of my arse. After all, the Morskan dialect has no changes to these phonemes at all, but enough changes elsewhere to change the name of Klingon Hol to Tsingon Hol. So, returning to Kalis.
Vaj kret kajoy j edge yabwij vika.
Quite the fellow. Back to the grammar. The grammar is very regular, and almost all the suffixes have the same CVC structure. Klingon has 3 noun classes. The first would probably be defined as human if Klingon was a Terran language pre-space travel, but considering there are many sentient spacefaring species in the galaxy, it's defined as for beings with the capacity to use language, as well as a separate class for body parts, not including the body itself, and a general class for all other nouns. These are mainly indicated by the affixes a noun takes. For example, there are 3 plural suffixes: pu for sentience, du for body parts, and me for everything else. Although me can also be used on sentient and body part nouns to indicate something all over the place. So goat is a person, goat pu is people, and goat me is people all over the place. At this point you may also wonder why I specified me can be used for body parts. After all, who would ever need a word like deshme for severed arms all over the... right, they're Klingons. So, moving swiftly onwards. Plurals are in the second position. First, we have an affix indicating either size or affection. Then in third, fourth, and fifth, we have accuracy for meanings like so-called friend and true friend, possession/determiners for owned or nearby things, and a syntactic role where there are 4 case markers for locative, ablative, causal, and dative, as well as a topicalizing suffix. Altogether, one word can get a very specific meaning, like say, Vengho me kok charge dak, which means in their so-called villages. Verbs have even more affixes. First, as I brought up, there's a prefix indicating both subject and object, though I didn't mention that there are also imperative forms for the second person. So where bilad means you read, yilad means read! The first 4 suffixes are pretty basic: reflexive/reciprocal for doing things to yourself or yourselves, a slot for volition and necessity, which can inflect various things, including the notably spacey bech, which indicates the subject has been set up to perform an action. So mot bech pu means the phaser is set to stun. Then slots for starting and resuming, and for causing to occur. The next slot is more interesting. There are 2 unrelated suffixes here. The more boring one is lach, which means able to. So vibom, I sing it, vibom lach, I can sing it. More interesting though is lu. You may have noticed on the agreement prefixes here, there's a row for unspecified subjects, but all the prefixes in it have equivalents elsewhere. The unspecified to first person singular is the same as the first person singular to third person. The unspecified to second person singular is the same as the second person to third person, etc. Well, these are distinguished here with the lu suffix. So a word like vitloi, I hurt it, can become vitloi lu, for something hurt me. Anyway, the next 2 will return to the dull, so there's a perfection and uncertainty, and a perfective, purposeful, perfective, progressive, and progressive with a definite endpoint. Before we get onto the honorific suffixes, or rather honorific suffix, there's just the one form in this slot, nesh, which is used to a superior who you have a very high regard for or are being polite to. It turns I meet you, kakich, into I am honoured to meet you, kakich nesh. Finally, we have the syntactic slot. This can do a whole bunch of separate things. Turn verbs into nouns, turn verbs into questions, turn verbs into wishes, various suffixes to indicate relationship between subordinate clauses and insubordinate clauses. You get the idea.
And you know what's another idea? Purchasing one of our... Oh gods, they're here. Not the copyright lawyers.
Studio? Okay, we'll use the emergency hologram robot.
This is not the purpose I was designed for. This documentary was sponsored by the subscribe button. Click it and your total number of subscriptions will increase by 1 unless you are already subscribed and...
As you might have guessed from... Klingon has quite the capacity for rudeness. First, there are the basics, like how the only word for greeting people, nuknech, literally means, what do you want? And that's not literally means in the sense that it's derived from that phrase and now it's just a normal greeting. It literally means in the sense that you'd no more walk up to someone saying nuknech in Klingon than you would walk up to someone saying, what do you want in English? The greeting's only used when someone approaches you. Moving on to actual swear words, there's quite the variety. First, there's a very extensive list of exclamations of pain or general annoyance. Baka, hui, and its longer equivalent, hui cha, hu teg, etc. Then there are epithets for directing at people. The most common is petak, which could be translated to arsehole. Then there are words like khovpat, to call someone insignificant, tachkek, to insult someone's honour, todshach, to call someone weak, and yintag, which calls them stupid. But say you want to insult someone with a good old-fashioned adjective. Well, I'm afraid you're out of luck, because there aren't any adjectives. Instead, there are intransitive verbs. As I said before, the word order of Klingon is OVS, so an intransitive verb is a verb followed by a noun. For example, yikwep, literally be wet, the coat, means the coat is wet. But then if you flip the word order, wep yik, the verb becomes an adjective, so now it means the wet coat. So if you're in this situation,
He's okay!
Was that Klingon?
and you want to call them
You psychotic nerd!
in a language you know they'll understand, you can call them a mawit-wit venku, and I'm sure they won't see any irony in the situation. On to adverbs. They're simpler and go at the start of sentences, with the ones that describe the time when something occurs first, since, as you may have noticed, tense isn't marked on the verb. More interesting are the conjunctions. So at first, conjunctions have different forms for joining nouns and joining sentences. And then on top of that, while there is a perfectly normal and for both of them, there are then separate words for what in logic we would call or and exor, the inclusive and exclusive ors. And now we will finish with a spoken sample, using the Klingon's most traditional form of storytelling, the opera.
Do you know any Klingon opera?
Hi, if you want to learn more about Klingon, why not check out the Ministry of Interdimensional Linguistics, and now, tentacles. How many is too many? We go.
Hey, I did a Conlang Showcase for a Conlang I didn't make. I don't have an endless supply after all. This video probably ought to have been another making a language video, or even something less Conlang-y. That being said, if you want something similar for a different documented Conlang, feel free to request it. Bye!